we're going to talk injuries, Jordan. Clemson's got quite a few injuries that they're dealing with. Like I said last week, I don't think we have any catastrophic injuries as of now, other than the ones that we already know about, guys that are already out for the season that we've already mentioned before, guys like Kobe McLeod that unfortunately went down, and other guys that went down prior to the season. But we do need to talk about some nagging injuries, two of which kept players out last week. Tyler Brown obviously got held last week with that sprained ankle. Peter Woods got held with the lower leg injury, knee injury, whatever they're calling it. Those guys are still reported as day-to-day, still getting better. We got some unfortunate news out of Adam Randall. We were really excited for him last week, getting his first touchdown as a Tiger, really having, kind of a bounce back game after, an unfortunate start to the season in Georgia where he racked up a couple penalties early, kind of got benched, kind of got shifted down in the rotation of the receiver, sort of losing his starting spot, but he stayed in it. Mentally, he stayed in it. He kept grinding. He didn't give up. He didn't sit on the bench and pout. And he comes out against NC State and has a pretty big day, caps it off with his very first touchdown as a Tiger. Couldn't have been a better day for him. Unfortunately, breaks his toe, has to have surgery this past Monday to get a screw put in it. Dabo said he expects him to bounce back very quickly, expects him to do great, and hopefully he'll be back by the Virginia game. But some really unfortunate news for him. Colin Sadler injured as well. So what are your thoughts on all these injuries and how they're going to affect the Tigers in this game against Stanford and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it is unfortunate. You mentioned Adam Randall. It sucks. Obviously, he had a big game this past week, led the team in receiving, got his first receiving touchdown, and he was playing with that broken toe, so that was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big one. We'll see kind of how Tyler Brown, works his way back in. Also wanted to mention DeMonte Capehart, who was held out after he only played 10 snaps against App State, and then they took him out. They didn't disclose what injury it was. I assume that he'll be ready to go for Stanford, but you never know. With these types of situations, and I mean, I understand why Clemson goes about doing it this way. I mean, and especially with a guy like DeMonte Capehart, who's been such a centerpiece of your defensive line. You don't want to give Stanford the impression that he won't be playing. So. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the reality of where we're at injury-wise. Not having Colin Sadler sucks a lot.
Yes.
But it puts more pressure on Trent Howard. He's kind of that next man up, can kind of play along the line. Well, really on the interior, and then Elijah Thurman is probably that seventh guy off the bench as a true freshman. So you're not dealing with a lot of depth here. So, I mean, potentially not having Colin Sadler available is a big deal. So you need Marcus Tate to stay healthy at that left guard spot and everybody else to be 100% too. So, again, we've talked about it. You don't have a whole lot of functional depth. Despite what Dabo might say, you don't have a whole lot of functional depth on your offensive line. Your starting five is really, really damn good.
Yes.
You want to keep it that way and keep them upright. So we'll kind of see, when Saturday rolls around, whether or not, we're going to get some of these guys back.
Yeah, you hope to see a Tyler Brown back. You hope to see a Peter Woods back. You hope that they are, possibly held out of the NC State game just, as to get them another week, get them healthy. Seems like Tyler Brown probably could have gone if they needed him, but obviously they were going to hold him because of how deep that wide receiver room is. Devontae Capehart, I think that's a bigger deal than, maybe any of the others, just because of how he anchors the middle of that defensive line. It might not show up against a team like Stanford, not real good at running the ball, but at the end of the day, you want your best players in there, and hopefully some of these guys work back and get better. Thoughts for, Adam. I hate it for a guy like Adam Randall. I mean, it's just a guy who's entire career at Clemson really has been hampered by injuries. Both the knee surgeries he's had and just constantly being injured. And then he has a day like that. And unfortunately, he's got to shut it down for a few weeks because he's got to get a screw in his toe. Just unfortunate for a guy like that. You hate to see it. I was kind of hoping that he would kind of use the momentum of the NC State game and kind of run off a couple big games and really gain his confidence and gain his footing and find his place in this wide receiver room and in this offense. But unfortunately, he's going to have to shut it down again, and hate that for him. But hopefully we start getting these guys back. I don't think much of it will show up against Stanford on Saturday. But again, we do need these guys to start getting healthy as the season goes on, because we're going to need each and every one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we'll see just kind of how all of that shakes out.
All right, Jordan, time to turn the page. Well, not turn the page quite yet, but put a final bow and give our final thoughts on this NC State game and what we truly saw from the offense, from the defense, the good, the bad, and the indifferent, if you will. Okay, so we'll start obviously on the offensive side of the ball for the Clemson Tigers and what we saw positively. Obviously, for the second game in a row, not the second week in a row, but the second game in a row, Clemson comes out and they start extremely fast, right? I gave the stat, I think, during the post-game live where Cade Klubnik had went 12 for 12 at one point in time in the NC State game, going back to the App State game, right? 12 drives, 12 touchdowns. Absolutely mind-boggling stat. Out of this world, regardless of the competition. That's an insane stat, right? He goes on to have another great game. The offensive looks explosive. He breaks off a 55-yard run. Maffa breaks off a big run. Big touchdowns here and there. Antonio Williams had himself a day. Adam Randall had a great day. The offense looked explosive yet again, and the game was pretty much in hand before the first quarter was over, essentially. So what were your thoughts on kind of how that first team offense looked, just coming out there and basically exploding from jump for the second game in a row?
Yeah, just again, another extremely impressive week. I think honestly, this game was, from a Cade Klubnik perspective, it felt like it was even better in a lot of, even though the stats didn't show it, he played better in this game than I think he did even against App State in some ways, because I think against App State, he was throwing to wide open guys a lot of that game. Like, it was a lot of schemed up stuff, but I mean, he knew where to go with the football, and he was decisive, and he was accurate and on time. And, when everything is clicking, that's kind of stat line you can get. But against App State, I mean, I think there were times where he had to make more anticipatory throws, more pre-snap, judgments about where he was going with the ball. And they did a lot of checks and stuff. So I thought that, it was just a continuation of Cade's maturity as far as like his role within the offense. He really is a leader, I think, at this point, and he's one of your best players. And that's, you weren't even able to come close to saying that last year. So I think that, from Cade's perspective, like he showed how much he grew up. And I think against a Power 5 defense, say what you want about the quality of NC State this season, it was good to see that, it translated over. And really impressive with him. Offensive line, continues to play extremely well. That first five, they were dominant up front, blowing NC State off the ball. Much of that first half. Run game was extremely effective. You were 10 yards per rush for a lot of the game. You only had to give Phil Maffa 7 carries, and he had an 100-yard game. I mean, that's pretty good. And Jay Haynes got in there and had a touchdown. That draw, I don't know if you saw the screenshot, the still shot of that draw play of Jay Haynes, but the offensive line literally NC State's defensive line like 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. It's crazy. The widest open hole I've ever seen. It was textbook. It was beautiful. So, I mean, not much more to say. The receivers continue to play great, and it's a different guy every week. I think that's one of the cool things is that you've had a different leading receiver each week this year. And so, I mean, it shows the versatility and depth of this group. And you continue to see flashes of the young guys. They held Wesco, but TJ Moore got in there and made a big catch on one of probably Cade's best throw of the night, where he was getting of the game. I think it was like 28-7 in the second quarter. It was a 2nd and 10, and they completely whiffed. The offensive line completely whiffs on NC State's defensive end, and Cade gets crushed as he releases that fade route. And it was just a perfect ball. And TJ had stacked his DB, and it was just a really, really nice catch. I just, that kind of stuff, when the play breaks down, has been really good to see that they're still able to make plays. The one where Cade has to avoid a rusher that's unblocked and hits Antonio Williams on a scramble drill.
Yep.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Because, it's great to see that the offense looks really good when they're on schedule, but even when they're not, they have answers, and they get, you have playmakers. Just, it feels good, man. So we're really, that's my long spiel, but just really pleased with the offense and the balance and the execution and the play of Cade Klubnik. So,
yeah, absolutely. Look, I know exactly where you're coming from. It's great to see this offense operate consistently and at a really high level. And I think you bring up probably the biggest point that maybe not everybody's talking about. Everybody's giving Cade his flowers and say he's playing great and all of that stuff. But when you truly look at this NC State game and look how even when he was pressured, even when there were free rushers, he's able to manipulate the pocket, still get a good throw off, and turn a kind of a busted, pass pro into a big time play. And he did it several times. He did it. You talk about the one to TJ Moore, the one to Antonio Williams in the end zone. He did it on several different occasions, off schedule throws where he didn't panic in the pocket. He didn't get those happy feet of old that we've seen so many times where he's just around there and his feet are moving a million miles an hour, but he's not really going anywhere, and he gives up a sack or a fumble or throws an interception or makes a bad decision. He didn't do any of that stuff in the NC State game. And Jordan, I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but we finally had a turnover-free game.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. It's been a long time coming.
What was our tally up to? What last time we tallied this up? Didn't we tally this up last week?
So so the last turnover-free game we had was the 2022 ACC championship game.
There you go.
So that's one. Played one. So Orange Bowl, that's one, and then 13 last year, 14, and then it took you 2 more games. So it was a 16-game run of turnovers before you got to a turnover-free game. So that's
not the kind of streak you set out to do as a team, but nonetheless, Clemson did it. 16 consecutive games with a turnover. We finally end that streak. And what better team to do it against, Jordan, than NC State in the Valley? Absolutely obliterated them. And the offense looked great. I can't say enough about the improvement of this offensive line, Jordan. We got to shout out the big boys up front because they just look different, man. And I know this offseason, back in spring, when Dabo Sweeney brought on Matt Luke, we were both super excited about it. I never thought we'd hire an offensive line coach the caliber of a Matt Luke, right? But we did, and we were excited about it. But coming into the season, both of us were kind of, limiting the expectations, right? What can you really do in one off season? How much better is this offensive line really going to be? But through 3 games, Jordan, they've answered emphatically that they are head and shoulders above what they were last year. They've yet to give up a sack that was charged to them, the offensive line.
Right.
Not that Cade hasn't been sacked this year, but charged to the offensive line specifically. The running game has been, outside of Georgia, pretty dominant. They could run whenever they wanted to outside of Georgia, but there's going to be a lot of teams that struggle to run the ball against Georgia, right? Their pass pro looks so much better. Although Cade was hurried and was rushed a few times, and they broke down some pass pro and made some mistakes in the NC State game, they're still miles ahead of where they were last year, and it's really exciting to watch this offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It just, I don't think ever as a Clemson fan, I've been excited to go back and watch the offensive line for Clemson. Even when you had Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, back there, it was what it was. You got good play from them, and you got functional play from them, and sometimes occasionally you had a good one. 2018 comes to mind, but like it was never. You never felt like you were just. There weren't many games where you felt like the offensive line just completely physically manhandled an opponent, and that's what you have now. I think you have guys that can actually displace defenders and create and get push and create running lanes. Like I could again that hole that Jay Haynes got on his touchdown run, I could have got. I'm out of shape. I probably could have got 10, 11 yards at least.
I'm trying to tell you, he's wide open, man. That offensive line is grading at a high level. They're moving the defensive line out of the way. The receivers are buying in on the outside. There's downfield blocking. That's what's creating all those explosive plays. It's good to see. There seems to be a cohesion on this offense and a buy-in by every single player out there. And I think that's what's creating this explosiveness in this offense, the confidence that they're walking around with. Not only Cade, but just the entire offense as a whole. They just look confident out there. They look like they know it doesn't matter what the defense does. They're going to go out there. They're going to out-execute them, and they're going to score. And that's just kind of the attitude that the offense has taken on over the first part of the season. And you hope that continues and they continue to grow. Obviously, we don't expect every game to be over by the end of the first quarter. That's probably not even close to realistic, and it's not going to happen for the remainder of the season. But it's good to see Clemson's ability to be explosive, to put the throttle down, and really keep the throttle down for the most part. Now we'll switch gears and talk about that defense. Absolutely bottling up that NC State offense through, pretty much 3 quarters. We covered the fourth quarter a bit in the post-game live, talking about the 3 touchdowns that were given up in the fourth quarter. What's been your assessment of the defense so far? We haven't really seen them have to play a complete game, much like the offense. Been rotating a lot of young guys in over the past 2 games because of the score getting out of hand and trying to develop that quality depth behind those starting 11 on defense. So what's kind of been your assessment of the defense thus far, and then specifically in this NC State game?
Yeah, I mean, defensively, I think they have their moments, and they show, like, I think from a down-to-down basis, they're still a really, really good defense, but it's just, the lapses are very obvious, and I think that's kind of what you saw against NC State. And really just when you have to get into, dig into your depth a little bit, you don't feel nearly as confident in those guys. And that's kind of the thing that, this team is going to have to figure out and sort of develop over the course of the season. But that's the great thing about having an offense that can score, the way that, this offense seems to be able to, is that you have that luxury now. You don't need the defense to go out there and keep you in ball games. At least against this schedule. Down the line in a, ACC championship, potentially against like a Miami or a playoff situation, you're going to need your depth to be developed. But NC State, you held their first team offense, and that when the game was really, really mattered, you got stops. But when you did dig into your depth, that was when, NC State started having some success running the ball. when NC State lined up in pistol and ran, stretch plays and outside zone, like they were eating you alive a good bit.
Yeah.
CJ Bailey, I mean, again, thought he actually had a pretty admirable performance. He had threw a pick and had a fumble, but he didn't look, rattled out there. And so, how much you credit that to him and how much you credit that to, maybe the defense not playing as well as you would have liked, I don't know. But I think that's kind of the reality with this group. And I talked about kind of some of the issues in the secondary as far as communication and all that. I think that reared its ugly head when you got into your depth. I think your starters are still pretty good, but there's still kind of that learning period for some of the younger guys, especially your younger corners and your younger safeties. So that really has to, be developed as the season goes on. I think the defense is a work in progress. They're functional, when it matters, and they're really, really elite in some areas, and they're lacking in others. And so you got to be able to kind of find your level with some of your weaknesses, and they need to be more functional when you have to go and deep into your depth chart. So because was not happy watching that fourth quarter. That's for sure.
No. I don't think any fan would be happy watching that fourth quarter. There's no reason to give up 21 points. We talked about specifically that last touchdown, and in my opinion, it just being a lack of effort out there. The one positive that I remember you pointing out in that post-game live video was the coaching on the sideline did not change. Specifically, Nick Eason absolutely destroying the defense on the sideline, because obviously he was not happy with what was happening on the field and the results that were out there. So, but with that said, it's really good to have the luxury to be able to get those second and third team guys out there, to get those depth pieces some real game experience so that they can be ready in the future, whether that be later this season or next season. Eventually the Tigers are going to have to call on these depth pieces. They're going to eventually, eventually the 2s and 3s become your 1s, right? So at the end of the day, it's great for Clemson to finally be back to having a luxury of playing depth pieces, right? And emptying the bench, so to speak, right? Getting 90-plus people on the field to play, 100-plus people on the field to play, because in previous seasons that wasn't happening anymore. So it was good to see that. Good to see Clemson back to that. Good to see those depth pieces get out there and unfortunately make some mistakes and make the score look a little bit better for NC State than it really should have been. But at the end of the day, does it really matter that NC State scored 3 garbage time touchdowns? In the end of the day, no, it doesn't matter. But you would like to see the second, third team depth piece guys execute at a little bit higher of a level. But again, they'll get there. They'll continue to develop. And these couple games that they have been able to get in there and play will go a long way in developing that depth.